So there was definitely like two pieces of it. Boredom in the sense that I saw it, right? I kind of
Mm-hmm.
saw what my future was going to continue to look like if I continued on this path. But the other part of it was I never got the feelings I thought I would experience when I hit this level. I thought I would be confident. I thought I'd be a lot more relaxed.
Yeah.
I thought I wouldn't have all the stress and the anxiety. Meanwhile, in reality, uh, my world was very small. It
Mm.
was it was work. Work consumed the
Mm.
majority of my life. I was waking up every morning and dry heaving
Oh,
every
wow.
single morning. And even at this time, the thought was, I need to learn how to manage this.
Yeah.
Not, we need to not feel this way anymore. Not, this is not right. It was more of, I need to manage this.
Human Design reveals who you are energetically and who you came here to be. I'm Dana, your Human Design guide.
And I'm Haley, on this journey with you to uncover the power of human design.
Together, we're here to explore how embracing your authentic self is the ultimate path to a life of more freedom and fulfillment.
Welcome to the Human Design Hive Podcast. Let's get into it.
Well, hello, and welcome back to the Human Design Hive Podcast. I am your host, Dana Phillips. And starting the intro today by myself because I'm sharing a conversation with you with a guest that I'm very excited to bring her on. I'll tell you a little bit about that in just a second. But first of all, I wanted to talk about the synchronicities and the timing of how perfect how this episode came about and how it's being released now. Because I just, as I'm recording this intro right now, I just finished editing the episode. And yesterday we had a sun transit where the sun moved into gate 46, the gate of determination. But it's also really about the love of the body and being in the physical body and realizing that we have this body as a vehicle to experience the physical world, and that this body is what helps us move in the direction we want to go, but also it is the embodiment of spirit, of being here, that we go through our experiences and we learn and we gain the wisdom from them. And one of the things about human design is this big lesson of like listening to the body, honoring the body, the wisdom of the body. Gate 46 is about using the body to move in the direction that you want to go and the things that you want to do. And as you are doing them, to be just fully present in the body, enjoying being alive, enjoying being an actual human being in this physical earth and all that life has to offer, and to appreciate what you have. And what's interesting is I'm bringing on the guest that I have today. Her name is Trish Gent, and she is a integrative life coach who helps those that are living in stress and anxiety to stop rushing through their life. With over 2 decades of experience as a registered nurse, she has been blending evidence-based science with powerful spiritual practices that helped her create this holistic approach that harmonizes the body and the mind. And her methodology empowers her clients to reclaim their confidence, trust their instincts, and take charge of their lives with crystal clear direction. And she does this primarily through helping them regulate their nervous system. And we're going to talk a lot in this conversation about nervous system regulation, specifically how she uses Kundalini yoga and breath work to help get you there. And there is a part in the conversation where we're talking about how, well, I guess a lot of it is there, but we're talking about how the body is this magical vehicle that we have that helps us tap into what is correct for us and what we need to do and to enjoy our lives. And so many of us are ignoring the signals of our body. We're all in our head all the time. We have all these external pressures. We have all this external stimuli. We have everything outside of us that is taking our attention away from our own bodies and our own well-being. and gets us dysregulated and quite often dissociated from what is correct for us and what our bodies are trying to tell us. And she explains what that looks like in this conversation, which I really hope you get as much out of it as I did. But what was interesting to me with the timing and everything is that as I release this episode, we're still going to be in that gate 46 and these themes of embodiment and enjoying our lives. And how can we enjoy our lives if our nervous systems are dysregulated? So I really hope that you enjoy this episode and get to know Trish. I really enjoyed getting to know her and her work. And make sure you listen till the end because there is a special gift for you guys that she's offering to us. And so I really hope you enjoy the conversation and let's get into it. So, hello, Trish. How are you doing today?
Oh, hi, Dana. I'm doing well. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, you're so welcome. I'm so happy to have you here. I've been wanting to share the kind of work you do with people for a long time. You work with breath work and Kundalini, and you're a coach, and you also teach Kundalini, as I kind of mentioned earlier in the intro. But really, I just wanted to, we are kind of new to each other. We have decided already that we click, but just in little bits and pieces here, messages back and forth. So if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about who you are and really where you started transitioning into the work that you're doing now. Are you still a nurse now?
I am still a nurse.
Okay.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
So
tell us
I
a
would
little bit.
Yeah, sure. So I think part of it is that I always had anxiety as a kid. I just don't think I classified it as anxiety. For me, it was very normal. You start to do all that self-exploration maybe with the books and different things. And I'm a Virgo. And I remember one of
Oh.
the things they said about Virgos is that Virgos are perfectionistic. And I'm like, oh, I'm a perfectionist. And I now looking back, I feel like that's one of those labels that we get stuck into. But
Mm,
what I also think is that it kind of helped confirm my thought process that these things are fixed
mm,
and that they
mhm,
were personality traits and that personality traits cannot change. Um, so kind of with that thought and mindset, I always was, a high achiever, always wanted to do well, always did my best in school, worked really hard, involved in activities. Everything looked all copacetic on the
mhm,
outside. And then, once I graduated, this was the same pretty much, through college as well. Graduated college, started working. I started working in the critical care units. And again, it was very like high stress, a high anxiety
I can
environment.
I can
But
only imagine.
yeah, I worked in like medicine and then multi-trauma. So I definitely was also, I would say, bringing myself to more and more different realms of chaos, of
Mhm,
disorder, and really not doing anything to, you would say, dismantle any stress or anxiety. I just sort of kept going into those different fields and
mm,
settings. They did excite me.
mhm,
Um, Continued through, and I think I dabbled in, I did clinical research for about 5 years, which wasn't necessarily the high stress anxiety piece, but it definitely had this different mental focus, and you definitely had a different form of stress. Now I was
mm.
working with a job that never really had an end to it.
Oh.
It wasn't like, oh, I worked my shift and I'm done. So it was a very, very different mindset at that point.
Mhm,
Continued to get my master's, and then I actually became a manager uh, in my early 30s of
mm,
a very large unit. I think I had about 60 something employees. It was a perioperative unit, so it definitely had a lot of moving parts. And it was a unit that had a lot of revolving doors of management. So it wasn't the, as you would say, the nice, stable, easy unit that a new nurse manager would go into. But I
mm,
had other qualities that helped, me get into that and made a lot of great changes. But again, it was very high stress. I felt like I had a lot I had to prove. Um,
mhm,
and I essentially, though, got the same job for myself like 2 or 3 other times after that.
mm.
The same type of unit that had a revolving door and no stability, needed all these changes.
So did you
And
think that if you changed the job, like the the
It
job, who you were working for, the situations would change
Yes, I
or the
did.
feelings?
No,
Yeah.
yeah, I did. At some point I did think, and I was just like, "Oh, it's the job. It's the job." And especially if you're in healthcare, everyone's always saying, "Oh, it's the job. It's the job. It's the
Mhm.
field." So I actually switched to another job, and at this point, I was not new in the role anymore. I had a really smooth transition, made a lot of changes, had a lot of support from leadership. Really on paper, like, there was no reason for me to be feeling as I was feeling. But I still was sitting here and I'm like, "So this is it? Like, the rest of my life, I just keep doing all of this and get into different positions, doing the same thing in a different way, and that's
Did
it?"
you find did you find at that point when you say this is it, was it like a sense of boredom, like you needed
Yes.
more or
It
okay.
was it
Mhm.
was total this, like, boredom. Boredom was one part of it. The other part
Mhm.
of it was, "Oh my gosh, and why am I not feeling that, like, freedom, that relief, that relaxation, that confidence that I thought was gonna come from this?"
Mhm.
So, there was definitely, like, 2 pieces of it. Boredom in the sense that I saw it, right? I kinda
Mhm.
saw what my future was gonna continue to look like if I continued on this path. But the other part of it was I never got the feelings I thought I would experience when I hit this level. I thought I would be confident. I thought I'd be a lot more relaxed.
Yeah.
I thought I wouldn't have all the stress and the anxiety. Meanwhile, in reality, uh, my world was very small.
Mm.
It was work. Work consumed the
Mm.
majority of my life. I was waking up every morning and dry heaving
Oh,
every
wow.
single morning. And even at this time, the thought was, I need to learn how to manage this.
Yeah.
Not, we need to not feel this way anymore. Not, this is not right. It was more of, I need to manage this. And I think the reason why I still had this thought of I had to learn to manage it
Mhm.
is because I still had the thought of these things were fixed. I'm an anxious
Mm.
person. I'm a type A person. I'm a high achiever. Those things
Mhm.
just aren't going to change because they're so embedded into me. And so I just need to
Mhm.
have to manage these things that tend to be these side effects of who I am.
I love that, and I did listen to your podcast, and which is a great podcast. It's called the Wellness Empowerment Project that you have with Julie Busso. Is that how you say your name?
Yes, you got it.
Sorry.
Perfect.
And I remember hearing this, and I think this is such a common experience for so many people, myself included, is that you get to a lot of to like the point where you were, and that management piece, like how do I manage it instead of like how do I really, because you just believed that that was how it was. That's who you are
Mhm.
because all those labels had been put on you. And especially maybe in a medical field, things are diagnosed and then a lot of times just symptoms are treated and not necessarily root causes a lot of times, which I
Yes.
know is a lot of the motivation and reason for what you're doing now with your work with wellness empowerment is because of this idea that we can change these things, right? So
Mhm.
I didn't mean to interrupt. I just really like that point.
No, I appreciate you listening and sharing your experiences of our podcast. And
Mhm.
you have it right on the nail of the head. The whole purpose is for to get that out there that hey, we do have the capacity to change. We don't necessarily have to just put our feet in the floor and just deal with areas of
Mhm.
our life that we don't
Mhm.
enjoy.
So when you started to you started to understand that things hadn't been changing, all the
Mhm.
outside circumstances were changing, but
Yeah.
there was still that feeling, and it was because you're operating on this mindset of, well, that's just the way it is. What happened that helped you see a different way? Like, how did that come about that you started to realize, like, whoa, wait a minute, maybe there's something else?
Yeah. So 2 things actually happened. One was in my original management role, I remember having a conversation with one of my employees, and there
Hmm.
were some shifts that happened. And she asked me a question like, "How did you know that that was the problem?" And my answer was, "What was the common factor?" I was like, "This person left, this person left, this person left. What was the common denominator?" And she was like, "Whoa," like, "You
Mm.
saw that." So I remember I think I was in the shower one day, and I think I had that same thought. I'm like, "Wait." I've worked my way to manage and deconstruct and change all these areas of my life, but there's still me. So my first thought was, and this is very simplistic, was I'm very type A, very focused, very, I was like, maybe I need to start doing what I call more type B activities. Maybe if I started doing things that were more like relaxing, that would be a first start. So my workouts were primarily like a spin class, which is great. I still love it. Don't get me wrong. But I was like, maybe I just need to not like wake up, go to a crazy spin class, like shower, and then like run around the hospital all day
Yeah.
or vice versa. Maybe I do need something that's a little more of the relaxation realm, which was very not me at the time. So I did. I started dabbling in some yoga. I was like, let me just do this yoga that was like on an app or something like that. I can't even remember. I think there was like a monkey. I called it monkey yoga. And I just went through these different postures and it took about 30 minutes. And I'm like, okay, I can dedicate 30 minutes a day to this. And the other thing I started doing is Oprah and Deepak Chopra started having these like 21-day guided meditations back then. I'm sure some people have remembered them and probably have dove into them. And I started trying them as well. The two things I really noticed was one, the meditations, I felt like I never really got relaxed for me. The other thing I noticed is that at the end of doing this yoga, there was a 5-minute yoga nidra where they would just kind of talk you through each part of your body to relax you. And then that was the first minute and a half. And the next 3.5 minutes, you laid there in silence. And I know this because literally I would start picking up my phone and knowing how much time I had left because it was pretty much painful for me to lay down and relax for that long. And I know it sounds ridiculous because it was less than 5 minutes. And even after they stopped talking, it was 3.5. But I think I realized how much time I was never in any sort of silence to the point where I almost could not handle silence. And granted, hospitals are busy. They are loud places. But there's other times where I could have been integrating silence, which I never did. And so really it was painful for me to just lie down and in my head just essentially do nothing.
And this is a place where I would like to jump in because I would like to share with the audience that you are in Human Design. You are a 4/6 profile, and which I don't know if you know what that means, but you also passed along. I got your chart, that's why I keep looking off the side. And you're an emotional authority, a manifesting generator. And what's interesting, and I'm sitting here listening, and I love hearing all this. You kind of share your journey because what you described there about trying to do the meditation with Deepak and Oprah, and which are great, and how it just your mind could never quite get you there. And you are defined in the head center and the ajna center. And this is roughly only about 30% of the population creates definition here. What that means is since you know yoga and you know the energy centers, it's very similar to it is like the chakra system, right? So the head and the ajna, it's like divine inspiration downloads all that stuff. And then the ajna is the conceptualizing part of our mind. So these two parts together, the head and the ajna, create like our mind, like how we do things. And with yours being what they call defined, it means that you are a source of ideas and inspirations to other people. Like your mind is always going to be something happening. And whereas my head center, just the top part, is undefined, and it is a lot easier for me to get into that headspace. There's still other reasons for having that sense of anxiety, because I always ran toward anxiety as well in my background, which is what got me on the path towards yoga as well. And so it's interesting to hear that those things weren't working for you, and it makes perfect sense in a lot of other things in your design about why you're drawn to the kind of practices that you are. But I just wanted to jump in with that part, and also the whole manifesting generator part. Your energy, you do have a lot of energy. It's sustainable. It's there. It wants to be used in lots of different ways, which is probably why the career path that you had taken was so good for you, because it is always constantly moving and changing in some regards, usually like especially in the critical care and all that other stuff, because you have different experiences, I would think, on the regular with different patients and everything else. Is that correct?
Yeah, yes and
Yes or
no.
no? Yes
Yes
or
and
no?
no. Yes, every patient is different
Mhm.
completely. But then you do start to kind of see the same, we'll say, inflammation and
Pattern.
processes
Mhm.
come into place as well.
Mhm.
So it's definitely a combination, right? Of,
Mhm.
maybe some overarching themes we would see, but at the same
Mhm.
time, every patient's different, every family comes in, that's different.
Mhm. Yeah.
And how we interact and how we work through. So the challenges aren't necessarily always with the patient. It could be
Mhm.
the family, it could be how everyone's relating, it could be figuring out what the plan is, lots of different pieces.
Yeah, and it's an environment that you're in. It makes sense to me as to why it would start to get to this place of like, I love that you recognize that you didn't know how to like really be quiet and be
Mhm,
still. And I mean, we all can. It doesn't matter what your design is. It's
mhm,
like we can, right? That's the power of our own choice and our using our bodies. But the work you had been doing and the things you have been trying, that work was exhausting. You were working a
mhm.
lot, weren't you? You were working something like
Oh,
50, 60 hours a week, something like that?
we're hitting above 60. I
I
actually,
can't even imagine.
I worked with a coach to try to decrease my hours, and I still didn't get them less than, like, 52 to
Mhm.
55.
Yeah. And so that would physically exhaust you, which was good
Mhm,
use of your energy. The kind of energy, the sacral center is what you also have defined as a manifesting generator, is that source of that. It is the chi, it is the prana, it is that center of that life force energy within all of us. And I'm a generator, you're a manifesting generator. That means that that energy is always available to us. It is sustainable. We can keep going and going and going, but we still can burn out if we're doing things that don't align with who we are and what we want to be doing.
mhm,
But you, this is a perfect example, I think, of how even with that defined sacral center, you can get to that point of burnout, even functional burnout, because you can keep going. You can keep doing the work. You can physically do it, but you could start to see what it was not working for the rest of you, for your spiritual self, your mental health, all that.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, and, I definitely was going out of in and out of adrenal fatigue at one point. I totally was in burnout, but we also were working a system where a lot of that was revered. You keep
Oh,
going,
yeah.
especially once you work in, like, critical care and, like, trauma and, like, even, the way our management team, like, operated. Wait, it's you could say it's top down, but when everyone's working really hard, long hours, and everyone's openly available for calls and whatnot, it is taxing, but you're also in an environment where that's expected. So you subconsciously are
Yeah.
thinking like, "Yeah, I should be able to keep going because that's what everyone else is doing."
Yeah. And that's what always amazed me in the medical field, like the doctors, medical school, all that stuff, like just really exhausting people and making them work beyond like normal human levels. I've never understood why that is, but we won't get into that. Maybe that's another conversation. So I'm sorry. Let's get back to the meditations that
Don't
weren't working for you.
apologize.
Like I said, I can get off on a tangent. So things weren't working. It was like, okay, this was different. I could feel this was something different, but it prodded an awareness in you that you couldn't
I
be
couldn't,
still.
yeah, could not be still at all. So I just remembered how painful that was. And then pretty much because I guess you can say my centers and everything, my head being so defined, I'm a big learner. I love to learn.
Mhm.
So I was always open to seeing different things. And I was scrolling through, I think, Mind Body Green. Probably I got an email update. And one of the things said on it about increasing your frequency. And I'm like, you know what? And I was totally living in exhaustion at this point, and I'm, like, increasing my frequency, and I'm like, "Well, you know what? I've been trying to, like, do things that were more relaxing, and that's not really working for me. Maybe if I increase my frequency, I would be able to get this, like, energy back that I had as well." So,
Mm.
as it turns out, it was a whole practice and session with Guru Jaquette, and she started by talking about what Kundalini yoga was. I think they must have been at some sort of like retreat or center or anything because she was doing a little interview and she was talking about how it helps with the nervous system and the glandular system. And this is the first time I've ever heard anyone talk about yoga in that format. And I'm like, oh,
Mhm.
and she's saying it's a technology. And I'm like, that fascinated me. I'm like, okay, you have a yoga technology that works on your nervous system and your glandular system. Like it just sounded fascinating to me. But I still didn't understand like how that could even work and how that could even happen. So I'm watching it. I think they talked for like 20 minutes and then they're going to start do a practice. And I'm sitting in my bed and part of me was like, do I go to my mat to try to do this practice? And the other part of me was like the momentum was there with me watching it in that moment. And I'm like, I'm going to stay here. And I'm not kidding you. I did the practice on my bed.
Mhm.
Pretty ridiculous. But then afterwards, it went into this like rose meditation. Only time in my life I ever did that. But regardless, I finished this whole thing, which I thought originally I was only going to be watching something for 5 or 10 minutes. It ended up being like an hour and a half long. I finished this whole thing and I was like, whoa, I feel different.
Mhm.
I feel better. I felt a little calmer in my body. I also felt like I had some more energy. And I was just so fascinated at that point. I was like, all right, I just need to know more.
Mhm.
So that's really when I was like, all right, let me just went on the website, found more information out about her, started doing some stuff virtually, started to do some things like by myself at home. All the free stuff I could possibly do, I was trying to do because I was interested, but I still wasn't all in yet. And then I would say a couple months in, that's when I started some doing things that were still online, but it was paid.
Mhm.
And I think from the time that I first started it, I would say probably in less than 6 months, I was like, you know what? I need to do teacher training. Like, and I still remember in the back of my head being like, you don't have a yoga body. You are not even
Mhm.
a person that does yoga. And now you're going to go and like do a teacher training. And I'm like, I don't know what is going to come of this, but I just know I need to do it. And I said, even if I don't become a teacher, I at least am learning about it and I'm fascinated by it. And I just dove on in. Now, mind you, I
Yeah,
still
you
haven't
don't.
done an in-person class.
Oh, really? Yeah, you don't have
Yeah.
to explain that to me. I can totally relate to that. I'll be the type of person to do the same thing and be like, I love this. I need to know everything about it and teach it and get
Yeah.
to the roots of it, of what it really means.
Yeah. And
Uh,
I would say that
and
was
it's
probably,
hard.
it was
I'm
the first
sorry.
time. Oh, I'm sorry.
I don't know, well, how big of an area do you live in? Because there's nobody around here where I live that I know of that teaches. There's plenty of yoga studios, but no Kundalini in
No,
person
there
classes.
isn't.
They're harder to come by because they
They
can be
are
seen as a little weird.
No, they definitely are harder to come by. In the
Mhm.
midst of everything, my husband and I did a move,
Mhm.
and I actually found a studio that was doing a teacher
Okay.
training that was about 50 to 60 minutes away. So I'm like,
Oh,
all
wow.
right. And they did weekend training. So I'm like, I could do this. So that's what I did. I just dove into doing the
Mhm.
training. And then I think it was in the middle of teacher training, one of our teachers said, you may have noticed a shift after you've been doing this for a while, and that could be why some of you are here. And so we all went around the room and the answers, what have you noticed is different after you've been doing so much Kundalini yoga? And and they asked the question. I remember sitting here thinking, wow, you know what? I'm not living in this anxiety anymore.
Mm.
And I almost didn't even realize it until someone had to like point it out. I
Yeah.
mean, I still wasn't all bells and whistles. I wasn't completely calm, but I wasn't doing the dry heaving in the morning.
Mhm.
I still was thinking, but it wasn't just so overthinking that it was all consuming. I noticed a difference. I noticed a
Yeah.
shift.
Yeah. It is hard to kind of put your finger on because it's such a internal feeling. I started back in it was like 2003 is when I think 2004 somewhere around there is when I first went into my first yoga class, which was like Ashtanga even I think. But the things do start to change and they are subtle, right? At
Mhm.
first. And even how many years now? It's been 20 years or whatever. It's interesting as you start making those internal shifts, you really don't. They're so subtle at first. You don't notice until one day you might find yourself in a situation that you recognize that previously this would have set me back like 3 or 4
That's right.
days or weeks or whatever, or been in a full blown panic. And so being able to find those differences between a little bit of anxiety and worry, and it still happens, right? But you know
Oh,
how to
yeah.
like, you see that it's happening, right? You
There's
recognize it.
Yes, and
Mhm.
actually there's 2 things I just wanted to mention.
Yeah, sure.
One is that you were talking about, it's so subtle we don't notice. Well, there was this situation where my husband and I went out to dinner, and
Mhm.
he goes, "Oh, you look pretty." And I just said, "Oh, thank you." And he almost fell off his chair. And I'm like, "What?" He goes, "You've never said thank you when I've said that to you before." And he was
Mm,
right. I would always bypass it. I'd be like, "Oh, no, I don't. I look horrible," or "Oh, I'm feeling extra fat today," or my hair's a mess." Pretty much I
mhm.
would dismiss any compliment that was given. And this was the first time that I actually accepted the compliment. And
Mm.
that's one of those things that isn't necessarily like written in the books that's going to happen or that you even
Right.
expect. And it's not something I even cognizantly thought of. Like it
Mhm.
just came out that, you know what? I've regulated myself to a point where I actually can accept a compliment and I
Mhm.
don't have to bury it.
Yeah. Well, let's get into that regulation part. So,
Mm.
because I know this is where you were going, that you may have been able to, because I'm trying to put my finger on it exactly how I heard it said, but basically it was like you realized that even though you were trying to change all these things and they weren't happening, and you came to this powerful realization that you were just very dysregulated, correct?
Mhm. Yes.
So,
S s
go ahead.
so yeah, so pretty much in the beginning, I just was doing tons of Kundalini yoga. Like, that's it. I'm just doing tons of Kundalini yoga. I completed the teacher training. Oh,
Before
yeah.
you go any further, can you tell me real quick, Kundalini mainly focuses on what? You said
Oh,
it uses a
yes.
technology and granule system. It
Yes.
is very different than a lot of other
It is very different than
practices.
the other yogic practices. So Kundalini yoga is known as the yoga of awareness, as it makes the unconscious into consciousness. And I know
Mhm,
that sounds very like mystical and magical, and you could sit there and say, yes, it is magical. But truthfully, at least in my point of view, it brings the unconscious into consciousness because we are doing that through regulating our nervous system by
mhm,
bringing our body back to center with the
mhm,
practices. So it really combines physical practices with breath work and mantra. And when we do the physical practices, everything is very rhythmic and repetitious.
mhm,
So it's not like a flow that you're breathing
mm,
into. It's more something that has this rhythmic pattern, like, and we are aligning the inhale, aligning the exhale
mm,
with the twists that we're doing, with the movements that we're doing. So we're really actually through that rhythmic and that repetition. We have this nerve called the vagus nerve.
mhm,
And that is helping to build up our you could say our resilience that space and manner. And then when we do the breath work, well, that vagus nerve, it goes all over and touches all of our organs. So the
mhm,
vagus nerve is actually all in our diaphragm and in our lungs. So that's really touching with the breath work that we're doing, as well as the vagus nerve starts at our it's in our cerebral nerve, but it goes down and goes along our jawline. So it
mm,
also is very much affected by our voice, the words that
mm.
we're using and that we're saying.
Oh. Oh, cool.
So all these things are very much put into place. And Kundalini has what they call Kriyas. And Kriyas are sets of, you could say sets of postures, but the postures usually involve different breath components, different mantra, sometimes different mudra, which would be the way you kind of hold your hands in that particular position. And all of those together are designed for a specific effect. So you'll have a Kriya that's literally to work on your nervous and glandular system. You have
Mm,
a small Kriya that is called fists of anger to work on anger. So you have these different areas. There's another one called let the liver live that's helping you flush out your toxins from your liver. So it's
mhm,
very different in the sense that we have these Kriyas that have been passed down through time that has proven themselves in a more of experimental and personal effect to have
mhm.
be working through.
And as you said, it is I've dabbled in Kundalini, and it is very different. It is very energizing, and it's amazing how just the simplest things, a way of breathing a certain way with a certain hand position, or even what is it in Breath of Fire where you hold your hands over your head for just like 2 minutes. It's like, oh my God, this is exhausting. It's
Yes.
just, but the
Yes.
feeling you get afterwards, after doing that breath work, it is different in a lot of different yogas, because a lot of yoga is always like you said, it's always, let's calm you down a little bit. But this one does it by, like you said, raising your energy and raising your vibration. It brings that after effect. And so I guess that would be the regulation part of it.
Yeah. So when we look at our nervous system, a lot of this is explained through polyvagal theory, which is focused on the vagus nerve, which I already mentioned. So if you want to look at it, we all typically hear of our nervous system from the automatic or the autonomic portion. So we have the sympathetic, which is that fight or flight response that we're in. And then we have the parasympathetic, the rest and digest. What polyvagal theory kind of brings into play that we haven't really talked about is that the other branch of the parasympathetic, which goes into the dorsal portion of the vagus nerve, which is this whole center, which is now looking at our sensory system, which is part of our nervous system that we don't usually talk about.
Oh, yeah.
So to even simplify it, I think of it as a pendulum. And we can swing all the way to the sympathetic, and we could swing all the way to, you could say, the dorsal. And the dorsal is the immobilization state. That's when you're, people say play possum. Our bodies can actually do that. We do it, it's called more of a shutdown or a disassociation when our body and our brain are not connected. And then we have a bunch of blended states too. I'll mention the freeze state. It's a blended state because you hear people talk about it. The freeze state is a blend of the energy of the sympathetic, but the immobilization of the dorsal. That's when you're stuck sitting down, rolling on your phone, scrolling on your phone, and you know you need to get up and do something, and you just don't do it. And we need to work our ways to get and start to mobilize that energy. That's what we call a blended state is that freeze state. Now, with that said, we have our centered state, which we say is the ventral state. That's the regulated state. And that state, in that portion of the vagus nerve, like I said, the vagus nerve goes all over. You could say you have a ventral, which is the front of your body, part of the vagus nerve, and the dorsal, which is the back of the vagus nerve. That back portion, like I said, we start to talk about the immobilization, and it's going into a lot of our organs that are below the diaphragm. The ventral portion is really going above the diaphragm, which is our heart, and then it goes up all into our face. So now we're also getting into, right? Like I talked about the mantra and what we're saying, but it also is bringing into our facial expressions, how we connect with other people. They call it now social engagement theory. So not to get all into the different theories of it, but when we are living in a dysregulated state, whether it's the dorsal state or the sympathetic state, what happens is your body can be living in that state, but you still may have a little bit of swing. So you may, as you start to do some nervous system regulating practices, and I'll take my first time doing Kundalini yoga, for example. I was living in the sympathetic, right? So I'm all the way over here. When I did that practice and I felt better, I actually think I got into that regulation for a moment. But the thing is, because I wasn't in that regulated state for that long, my capacity and my threshold for being able to stay there was super tiny.
Right.
So I would just bounce back really quickly. But over time, when you do, I would say, more specific nervous system regulation practices that are aligned with what state you are in, and you start doing them routinely, and you start being able to pull them in when you notice yourself dysregulated over time, you start to widen that threshold and widen your capacity, or even better, widen the resilience that you have. Because
Mm.
now, if you've widened the state and you have that pendulum swinging, your pendulum can swing pretty far with you being in that
Mhm.
regulated state right now.
Mhm.
Doesn't mean you don't go out in the other states and you don't notice
Mhm.
it,
Mhm.
but it means that you have that greater capacity. So you can handle things that are stressful. You can handle things that previously would knock you off your feet. And the reason why this is important is because when we are living in the state of the stress response and we're living in anxiety, our brain and our blood flow is now focused all in the lower portion of the brain, the amygdala. We're living in the
Mhm.
fear.
Mhm.
And when that happens, there is no blood flow actively going to our frontal lobe. Our frontal lobe is the executive function. This
Mhm.
is where we start to figure out problems. This is how we
Mhm.
figure out how to get out of problems and to look at things in a different way.
Mhm.
And so, what happens if we are living in these states of stress? It's very hard to get yourself out of those states of stress because your body's just trying to protect itself this whole entire time.
Yeah.
But once we regulate and we can build our capacity, we're able to handle more and different things because we're still able to have that blood go to our
Mhm.
executive portion of our brain.
I know. I speak about that a lot with people I know, with my family, because the regulation kind of thing. And I love what you said about where the blood flow is, because, and I know you know about EFT and tapping and everything, because I've trained with that too. And you can see it happening in someone when they're like in a state and they're spiraling. It's like, you need to calm down, because you're not going to find a solution by the brain, the state of mind that you're in right now, because you literally can't. Like, it
Yeah.
literally shuts down all of your not decision making, but being able to actually open yourself up to another possible solution, because it's just like straight survival, which
Mhm.
is something I learned in my Reiki training way back then too, was like the body is either going to be in that crisis mode or healing mode. Like, it can't
Mhm.
be in healing mode if it's in crisis mode, and vice versa. So it's like what you were saying, if you can keep yourself widening that space that holds that more healing space, or what do they say when you're in homeostasis, right? Where it's
Mhm.
like where the body is able to do what it wants to do naturally, which is to have you in an optimal state of health and well-being.
Mhm.
Like, that's where we're supposed to be.
Yes.
And it's really sad. And I think a lot of it is specific to our culture here in the United States, as we talked about earlier. Like, the harder you work, the more you push, the more you hustle, the more you're seen as
Mhm.
successful and valuable. And there's a movement that I think you're a part of, that I hope to be a part of, which is this movement of, it's not always about the output, but it's about what a true measure of success is the quality of your life, your personal well-being. And I love that breakdown you just did of how the nervous system regulation, because I'm fascinated by all of it. And I love the information you just gave me there about the vagal nerve and all that stuff, because I find that really fascinating
Yes. And I
as
just
well.
wanted to also highlight some layers of defenses. So when we talk about the nervous system, the sympathetic is really our second line of defense, right? Our first
Mm,
line, the ventral state, didn't work. So we have to go to our second line defense, the sympathetic state. And if you
mhm,
think about it, if you're in that state long enough and you can burn yourself out, you may have to
mhm,
go to your third line of defense, which is that dorsal state, which is
mhm,
more of that immobilization state. And this really kind of brings me to the other point when you were talking about our culture. We like to compartmentalize healing in our
mm,
healthcare system, right? We have to have a specialization. And we also like to focus on the mind. And we forget that our body is communicating information to our brain. Actually, our heart communicates to our brain more than the brain communicates to the rest of the body.
mm,
So if
mhm,
we want to shift something, working with our body with this bottom up approach may be a lot more fruitful than just doing the bottom down. And I think that's
Wow.
what we see a lot of is people have been focusing on the top-down approach, using our brain to change our body. And listen, they do talk to each other. So there is value in that. But we're also forgetting the other piece of the puzzle, which is
Mhm.
our body communicating to our brain.
Yeah, which I don't know if you're aware of, which is a huge lesson in human design, and the purpose of what it's here to show us is to get us back into the body and realizing that the wisdom is there in the body. It's not in the mind. You may have defined head and ajna. That just means like you're giving out ideas and inspirations to people all the time. You have a more fixed way of seeing things potentially. But what we're here to learn in human design is that we have our own innate way of knowing what's correct for us. It's called our authority, is how we make decisions. And it's interesting because it shows us how we, as a species, as humans, we started with this body awareness in the instinct and survival, kind of what you were talking about, these responses that we had that kept us safe, which is rooted in fear. Like fear was necessary to our survival because it helped us engage these processes in our bodies that got us moving and got us safer place. And then that's where the memories linked, is in the fear. It's like, oh, I know that. And then as we've evolved, we have moved into this more mental awareness, the very logical. This is where modern science and medicine and communities and building and structures all came in. That's been part of our evolution in the last 400 years or so. What human design points to is that we're moving currently, and for the next 400 years or so, these are like planetary, global, planetary, universal era type things, into the emotional awareness, into our emotional solar plexus center in the body graph, is going to be kind of this new level of awareness where, and I think it shows in a lot of these mind body circles and metaphysical and everything, that we are more and more being shown the importance of how we feel is how we create, it's how we manifest, it's how we uh well, I said create, but I should say create the lives we want. It's like we can only mental ourselves. Our minds are great. They're there to help us. They're here to organize and do all this other stuff, but they're not here to it's not here to make the decisions. And we're learning to get back in touch with that part of ourselves that knows in the body what's
Yes.
correct. But
And
like you said, if you're dysregulated, the body is confused.
I was just gonna say, we have an area in our brain called the insula. And if we're
Mhm.
living in anxiety, the insula has difficulty, we'll say, interpreting what the brain is telling it to do.
Mm.
And if you're in like a disassociation, like that's a separation between the brain and the body. So they're not communicating to each other. So either
What
way,
would
if you're
that
in a
what would that look like? I mean, what do you have an example of that?
disassociation,
Yeah.
yeah. So I will say I have a couple clients that they lived in that state for a very long
Mhm.
time.
Mhm.
And really, the one thing they said is that they were not active participants in their life. Because after working with
Mm.
me, they're like, I actually feel like I'm an active participant in my life. So
Mm.
really what that means is that they're it's almost like the heads in the clouds sort of thing. It's not that you're always daydreaming. I mean, you may be daydreaming and
Kinda like on
everything.
autopilot, kinda like
Yes, you're
autopilot
just
through
on
life?
autopilot. Yeah, I think a lot of them have been people pleasers, you know what I mean? So they're just very kind of disconnected from what their body's telling them and what their own needs are. They're
Mhm.
very much just kind of focused on like, "Oh, here's what I can to, like, keep the peace." You're not really connected in that present moment.
Mm. Yeah, okay. I like that you explained it, because now I can understand the awareness that I have of it, which is in these terms that we're talking about in human design, we talk about the conditioning a lot. It's like you are, or really, until I always have this belief, until you start questioning, like, why do I think this way? Why do I behave this way? Why did I react this way? You are in that, I guess, dissociated state where you're just kind of like moving through life. Like you said, you check the boxes. Okay, I've done this, I've done that. And so that's the state you were in, because like, well,
Yeah,
what's happening in my life? Because
and
I'm just like, I've done all the things, and why am I still just like, where's the juice in life?
well, exactly. There definitely can be, like, some apathy, I could say, with that.
That's a good word.
And one thing to really note too is that when you think about it, if there's a massive trauma event that happened, if you hear people talk about it, they essentially are saying that they've disassociated themselves. Whereas they removed, you know what I mean, from their brain, from being present to what was happening to their body.
Mm.
And I'm just mentioning
Survival. That helps you
because yes,
survive.
it is. And that's really what our body is doing. It's constructed these amazing ways to help us survive. And we can't always be reliant on the outside world giving us safety. So
Mhm.
nervous system regulation is a way that we bring safety back into ourselves and back into our bodies.
So through Kundalini yoga then with that in mind, does it, I mean, I'm sure it does, but maybe you can speak about it. Say there are past traumas, which everybody has trauma, doesn't matter really the level of trauma. There's any time you are, like you said, disconnected from who you are. Does it clear that out in the sense that, case in point, say you had, I can use my own example. So going through like the death of my mother and grief and stuff like that. I mean, I'm aware of it and I know what's going on and I know that there's certain levels and I keep trying to clear that out with different things, not clear it out, but just kind of
Work through it.
because it goes so deep, right?
Yes.
You don't realize how your mind tries to protect you in those ways, just so you can keep going. When you've been through traumatic experiences or just difficult challenges in life or a lot on your plate, how much it just kind of stuffs it down and keeps you going, especially as women. We just got to keep going, right?
And something culturally we've been taught, right? Not to
Yeah.
experience your emotions. You just push it to a side, you deal with it later, but you know, somehow later's
When
never
does that?
came.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Because
So
now you gotta do 15 other things.
Yeah. Do
So
you find that it brings that up? Does it shift that,
yeah.
clears it out? Like,
Yeah, it definitely can. It's Kundalini and I would say our nervous system in general, they're all very personal experiences. And yes, you have different Kriyas that have different effects, but there's times where people are in classes, and I think I was in a class where I shed some tears at one point, and I may not know why. And
yeah.
that's the piece is it's okay not to know why.
Mhm.
Let it happen because something was being cleared. And if you are meant to know the why, it will come up. But the other piece I really do want to mention, especially, is that when we are living in these states of stress and anxiety, you're really not able to work through until we start to become regulated.
Until you get, yeah, you're right. You're right.
Because for two reasons. One, if you're trying to like clear out some past events that have happened, even if you're trying to do it consciously or rewrite it, it could be triggering for you and you could keep yourself in this dysregulated state.
Mhm.
But the other thing is too, if we're living those dysregulated states and we're not connecting to that ventral state, we're not connecting to that heart center, we're not able to really have this vision that things can be different.
Right.
We're not able to get that emotion into play. And to be truthful, you're not able to feel those emotions yet. Because if, you know,
It's dangerous.
well, not only that, like with the way, especially if you're in that anxiety state or in that, you're not reading, your body's not, brain is not reading it, or it's misinterpreting it. And I'm saying this because, yes, like you mentioned, a lot of people stuff down their emotions and feelings, but how many of us were really taught to explore what these emotions are and what do they mean? And I'm saying this because you said before how we are supposed to transition through states. And I had this conversation in my class this morning that I actually experienced some big anxiety earlier this past week. And I'm saying this because for me, now working myself through it, I had some great awareness with it. So one, I'm grateful that I had the awareness that I went into anxiety and I noticed the emotion, because 5 years ago, I wouldn't have noticed the emotion shift because there was nothing to shift because I was living in it. So, wow, okay, I actually noticed it. Two, I was really aware of what happened and what shifted. I saw that with clarity. I didn't know why yet, but I saw it. Okay. I did my usual meditation practices. I did not dive in and go crazy and like fight to get it done. There was a sense of trust that it was going to work itself through. And truthfully, we have to be okay with sometimes trying different things, keeping up with the practices, sometimes reaching out to people and doing things in a different way in order to clear that out. But if
Mhm.
you don't know your body and you don't know what works for you and you don't feel safe doing those different things, you're not going to be able to clear that out of your system.
Mhm. I love that. It's so true. And we're probably going to have to wrap this up soon, but
Yes.
I love what you were talking about there of being able to recognize it and not necessarily know all the reasons behind the big anxiety that you said that you were in, that you were having a lot of anxiety, because there could be any number of things. Sometimes it's not even ours. Sometimes it's just like it's in the air and you become more sensitive to it. But I love what you said, that you just were able to come to the awareness of it and be okay with not knowing in that moment what it was, but just to allow it work out. Because in your design, as I mentioned, I think earlier, you have an emotional authority, which means your decision making, your inner decision making process is about clarity over time. It's recognizing that, because relatively half of us are defined here and half of us are undefined. I'm also defined. And so we do hold the emotional frequency in the room, whether we're aware of it or not. And it is understanding and starting to learn. This is what I have found through human design and this awareness, is that I used to really try to dig and get to the root of things, of why, just so I could, like you said, so I could figure it out and clear it out and get rid of it, right? But now I'm just aware that sometimes, due to my energetic nature as an emotional being, our energy, our emotional energy does operate in waves. There's different kinds of waves, but we become, as we have awareness of it, we can become comfortable with knowing that emotional energy is always shifting. It's always moving. It could have a little bit of a cycle to it, but there's no, at least for us, there's no forcing it. It's going to move at its own pace. And we have to learn also, when you were talking about that pendulum swing, we have to learn that it's about over time raising that vibration, like you said, so that when you go through the waves can become shorter, so we're not so much in the low all the time, or we're not in
Mhm.
the high. We do have the power to help make the wave more manageable and more navigable, but we're also always going to be just kind of this ebb and flow in life all the time, and learning to be comfortable with that. So I love that you touched on that part.
I just want to add one piece,
Mhm.
and it's that I did get the clarity of my why, but it wasn't until after
Mhm.
I released it physically.
Mhm. Yeah.
And I just wanted to note that too, because when we're in this piece where we're like, oh, I need to figure out why, and I need to clear this out, I
Mhm.
need to hurry it up,
Mhm.
you're creating more tension in your body and things
Yeah.
aren't going to flow, right? Like the blood's not going
Mhm.
to flow, the prana's not going to flow, the oxygen's not going to flow. So you're not going to get that. But once
Mhm.
you work it through your body, and it may be a Kundalini practice, it may not be a Kundalini practice, it
Yeah.
may be a combination of a couple different things that maybe once you started journaling, you had the aha moments. I had like a
Mhm.
little snippet of it 2 days earlier. And then once it was released, then it all made sense.
Mhm.
And I think that's a big piece, especially if we're living in stress and anxiety, is that we have this perceived lack of control and we tend to put that control on the outside. And what we
Mhm.
don't want to do is then replicate that when we fall into these patterns and then start to control our own healing process and our own healing journey.
Mm.
Because once we start doing that, we're not really allowing things to flow in its natural pattern, its natural nature. And you're
Mhm.
not able to work in your natural pattern or nature
Mhm.
if we add in those constraints.
Yeah. I'm glad you said that, because that is overall another lesson in human design. It teaches us that we are all individual. We are all unique. We are all designed to be here and live and learn with each other, but there's no one way of doing anything.
Yes.
Right? What works for some might not work for other, because there can be components, like you said, people would love of Kundalini that you can take some of it and not like. I love the breath work and but I'm also somebody that will pick something up for a little bit and maybe try it and do it a little bit more over here. Kundalini, I think, will have a bigger space in my life at some point because it always keeps coming back around. You know how that happens, where it's like something, and then when you're ready, it'll like really get its hands in
Yeah.
you. But I love breath work because I think I think all of us on the generally larger part of our lives, we're not breathing correctly.
No, we're
or
not taught to breathe appropriately. And I can't tell you how
no.
many people have been like, I just realized I was breathing wrong my whole life. And I said, I know, that's why I go with the basics when we start talking about these things. But you said you enjoy the breath. If you just pick a certain
and
breath
mantra. I love mantra
or a
too.
mantra, truthfully, if you just pick one breath or even one mantra, and you even do that breath, just start with like 1 minute a day. I mean, you're doing Kundalini.
Yeah.
And I think this is, where some of my work differs, right? We're not just going and doing a Kundalini class every single day.
Right.
I did that. It took me like a year. But if we can learn what our body is telling us and how our body is feeling before and after, and we try different things that work for us, and our brain has a specificity in our nervous system. So if we can clearly define the right thing to do, and I hate to say the right thing, but the right sector of things, you don't want to do a long exhaling breath if you're in the immobilization state, because it's going to decrease your heart rate even lower, and you already have a low heart rate. So there is this information of knowing where your body is, but also there are ways to integrate these things in your life that are not necessarily coming down and sitting for a practice all day. Kundalini yoga is a nervous system regulating tool, but not all nervous system regulating tools are yogic tools. We can do a blend of both. And that's what I do. So it's more, we need to blend it all together to see what works best for our life.
100%. Well, I want to make sure that everybody listening knows that you have a really great freebie available that introduces everybody to Kundalini. Kundalini to calm anxiety, I believe is what you call it.
Kundalini to calm anxiety.
And it's great because I have gotten on your email list a great little introduction right away that Trish will walk you through the practices that she started with. And you also have a video component too.
Yeah.
And I really enjoy it. And I have done some of those before, the Satnam and then the breath of fire. I do love breath of fire because we learned that in pranayama, and it can be challenging at first. You just got to do it at your pace. But really, if any of this interests you as you're listening, I highly recommend it. It'll be in the show notes where you can find the link to that. But it's a really great and easy introduction you do there to
I'm
Kundalini.
glad you enjoy it. And I just want to add that I am coaching you through your inbox for the first 5 days. So it's not like you are just getting it and you're like, let me figure this out.
You definitely are holding the hand. It was really great.
Good. I tried to. But yes, that's a gift to all your listeners. I hope they try it, they experience it, they enjoy it. And I say in my emails, feel free to reach out, ask a question. If you hit a block or if you had some insight from one of the journaling questions, share them.
That's great. And so we are going to wrap this up. Like I said, you'll find in the show notes all the places you can find Trish, but also make sure to check out her podcast, the Wellness Empowerment Project. You have lots of great interviews on there, and you talk about a lot, not just what we talked about today, but you talk about a lot of different practices, as you said, that routes to get there to help bring yourself into that regulated state, as you said. And is there anything else you'd like to share before we wrap up?
I just wanted to thank you for your time. Thank you so much for having me on. I truthfully enjoyed talking with you. And please go to Kundalini to Calm Anxiety. Check out the podcast. We're two nurses exploring holistic health modalities so you can become the leader in your own wellness journey.
And you can tell the two of you are friends. You get along great. It's not all heavy stuff, which is what we try to do here too, is to keep things, a little bit lighter. It can, trying to figure yourself out can be heavy enough as it is sometimes. You got to bring some humor into it now and then, right?
Yes, you definitely catch us laughing. And sometimes trying to mute our mic so it's not so hard to edit out
I
afterwards.
know. It can be a challenge. Well, I appreciate you, Trish, and I thank you again for being here. And make sure everybody checks out those resources. And bye for now. There you have it. Did I tell you that was a really great conversation or what? I just love her calm energy, even though she has also that manifesting generator. You can feel the enthusiasm from her, but at the same time, she does have that nice balance and is very calm. And I just really, really enjoyed our conversation together. And as I said, make sure you check out the show notes. You will find the links there in the gift that she mentioned to you, her guide of Kundalini to calm anxiety. I will tell you, as I said, I did sign up for her newsletter and I got the free gift. And I have been experimenting with it and using it. She offers 4 different breathwork practices in there that can help you really start to tap into the experience of this form of nervous system regulation. And as we said, she walks you through the whole thing. It's whether you like learning a written format or watching on video, she has both for you there. So it really is a great option for you. And make sure you check her out on Instagram at coach_Trish Gent. And also, again, as I mentioned, please be sure to check out her Wellness Empowerment Project podcast. It's really, really a lot of fun and really engaging topics and conversations there. So I hope you enjoy that. So as I leave you today, I want to remind you again that in order to fully enjoy your life and understand who you truly are, you can really tap into that by, first of all, understanding your human design, but also learning to care for and nurture your body, regulate your nervous system, and see the magic that can unfold for you in your life as you do so. So with that, love you so much. Thank you for listening, and we'll catch you in the next episode. You made it all the way to the end of today's episode, so you must have liked what you heard. If you did, make sure you subscribe so you never miss an episode, and perhaps leave us a good review. And if you know someone who wants to dig into all things human design with us, make sure you share the Human Design Hive podcast with them. We'd really appreciate it. Thanks for listening.